welcome to our webinar today on recruitment and onboarding with Acas. So my name is Lexia Rose, I'm the Learning Network Manager at the Good Employment Charter. So this webinar is part of our Share and Learn series to cover the Employment Rights Act 2025 and all the legislative changes. I can't get my words out today. So this session will cover all those changes around recruitment and onboarding, and I'd like to hand over to Helen Horton from Acas, who is going to be delivering this webinar for us. So over to you, Helen. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Alexia, and good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming along to our webinar on recruitment and onboarding. I'm just going to run through a couple of domestics before I kind of get going with the agenda and moving on to talk to you about the content. So the webinar was scheduled to last for about an hour. I'm not going to talk at you for an hour. That has incorporated a bit of time towards the end for a Q&A as well. While we're on the topics of questions, like I've already said, we do have that time inbuilt at the end for a Q&A if that's what's needed. But please do feel free to be asking questions as we go through and as I'm sharing information with you this morning. To do that, we have set the webinar up this morning so that you'll be able to do so using the Q&A tab on your toolbar at the bottom. So if you just pop any questions in there, our colleague Inez from the Good Employment Charter is going to be monitoring that chat and may well answer a couple of the questions as we're going through, or indeed we might park a couple of those and pick them up towards the end for a bit more of a general discussion. Okay. You'll also notice that with it being a webinar format, you have had your cameras off and you are on mute, so it is the Q&A that we will ask you to use today. And finally, from me, just domestics-wise, the slides that we go through, Alexia does have a copy of these, so we'll be able to circulate these to you if you feel that they'll be a useful resource following the webinar this morning. Okay. Just to introduce myself, just in case there's anybody on here who I haven't met earlier. My name is Helen Horton, as Alexia said. I am a Senior Business Advisor with Acas Northwest. I trust that you are all familiar with Acas, being good Employment Charter members. But just a little bit about my background, again, like I say, just in case I've not met you before. I've been with Acas for just over 18 years now, and I've done lots and lots of different jobs while I've been with Acas. But my current role, Senior Business Advisor, means I am out and about all over the Northwest. I'm working at home today, which is a luxury for me, not being on the road at 7 o'clock this morning to go somewhere. But I'm out and about all over the Northwest, talking about employment legislation, talking about best practice, pretty much talking to anybody who will listen to me about anything to do with employment law, in order to see if we can help to promote and create those fantastic working relationships that we're all aspiring to. Okay, so that's a little bit about me, a little bit about Acas, just by way of introduction. Let me move on to our slides. What is it that I'm actually going to talk to you about today? So, although the main focus of today's webinar is on recruitment and onboarding, I think it would probably be remiss of us to talk about that topic without at least revisiting the Equality Act. Now, I know that for people who are on the call today, the Equality Act will be like second nature. It is stuff that you will all be familiar with. So it really is just a very brief revisit to the Equality Act, just as a little bit of a reminder that the Equality Act is one of the pieces of legislation that just applies no matter what. So there is no length of service, there is no qualifying period. It applies no matter what, and therefore it also needs to be something that has to be in the back of our minds when we're going through any recruitment process. So like I say, just a little bit of a look back at the Equality Act, just to make sure that that's something that we are keeping in mind throughout all of the rest of the stuff that we're talking about today. Then going to move on to talk to you about recruitment. And again, this is a bit of a revisit because it goes hand in hand with the Equality Act. But just having a little bit of a chat to you about how we recruit, why we recruit. And again, the reason we've included this in this webinar on onboarding and probation is ultimately because this is when all of this really important stuff starts. It's right at the beginning. It's before we've even got somebody in post, because the aim of recruitment, as we all know, is to make sure that we're getting the right person in post. And if we are looking at getting the right person in post, it makes the next bits, the onboarding and probation, that bit easier. Not going to say easy, but just that bit easier. Okay. I'm then going to move on to talk to you about probation in general. So what is it? What's it look like? What should be happening during a probationary period? And what I am going to say, I'm going to really, really upfront with you and say, yes, these share and learn sessions, the topics that we've chosen to speak about have come from changes that are coming because of the Employment Rights Act. But it's really important for us to remember there isn't actually any changes coming in the Employment Rights Act specifically to do with probation. There's no law change about probation. What there is, and what I'm sure people are familiar with and are expecting and have got on their horizon, is a change to the qualifying period to make an unfair dismissal claim at an employment tribunal. And the knock-on effect of that has been that a lot of employers are sitting up and taking notice and thinking, oh heck, let's just have a look at our probation periods. Let's have a look at our onboarding. Let's have a look at our induction and make sure that we're doing everything right. And again, just to be really, really upfront, us at Acas, we're impartial, we're about good employment relations. Nothing that we talk about when we talk about onboarding and probation is done with the view of, and therefore let's dismiss somebody within the first 6 months. It's all with the view of, let's just make sure that we're giving people the right tools and the support that they need in order to be able to do their job properly. Okay. So we will look at onboarding, we'll look at probation, we'll look at who should be involved, when should they be involved. We will look at what sort of contingencies employers should be putting in place. We can have a bit of a conversation or a few thoughts around what happens if somebody's not available or somebody goes off sick. What does that mean? So we'll look at these things around onboarding and probation from all sorts of different perspectives. And it may well be that for some of you on the call today, that you might finish at 12 o'clock today and go, yep, we're doing all of that. I'm confident. It's been a bit of a refresher, but it's also been a bit of reassurance. For others of you, might give you a little bit of food for thought, things to go away and have a think about, things to go away and check with our policies, check with our procedures, making sure that they're all up to date and they're in the best form that they can be. Okay. So that's what today's going to look like, or that's what this webinar is going to look like, I should say. So moving on and just making a start. Like I say, the first thing I wanted to talk to you about, a very, very brief recap of the Equality Act. And like I've already said, the reason that we've included this is purely because it's something that has to be underpinning any decisions that we make throughout recruiting, throughout onboarding, throughout probation. Okay. So we do have a brief slide there, which reminds us of what are the protected characteristics that we're looking at when it comes to equality. I know that people on the call will be familiar with this. I do not intend to turn this into a specific equality, diversity and inclusion webinar or anything like that, but I do just want us to have these in the back of our minds. And just a couple that I think are worth picking out when we're looking at the Equality Act in relation to recruitment, okay? Because there are certain things that still to this day, employees are, or prospective employees, I should say, are sometimes a little bit concerned about. My background in Acas before I became a senior business advisor, I worked for many, many years on our helpline. And I always share that with people. People who've met me before will probably have heard me talk about this before. But the reason that I always share that with people is because I think it does give a really, really good eye opener, I suppose, as to what is actually happening in the real world. What are the actual concerns of people when they're ringing our helpline? It's all completely confidential, and I would never know anybody's names or the organisations that they work for. But what I always did get was a good overview of kind of common concerns. And the reason I'm raising that when I'm talking about this particular slide and the protected characteristics when it comes to recruitment is because some very, very common questions that we got were always around disability or pregnancy and maternity. And I'm sure some of you can guess the questions that I'm thinking of. Prospective employees would ring our helpline and say, do I have to tell them? Do I have to disclose? Okay. And of course, as we know, the answer to that is no. unless you're a certain stage of pregnancy, of course. There's absolutely no obligation on anybody to disclose a disability. However, of course, if a disability is not disclosed, then the employer doesn't know about it and isn't able to offer reasonable adjustments, for example. Now, the thing that got me thinking quite a bit about this is, why is it that people are asking those questions? And sometimes it can sometimes be a little bit of one of those myths that just needs a bit of myth busting and applying to it. And it's one of those things where people have been on Google and been misinformed. But it's also equally as likely that people may well have had bad experiences in the past. It shouldn't happen, but just because something shouldn't happen doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't happen. So, for example, somebody who is living with a disability who discloses it to their employer and then by coincidence is made redundant the following week, for example. It shouldn't happen, but there is every possibility that people may have been burnt by maybe not so great employers in the past. And that's why they're asking these questions. That's why they're concerned at this really, really early stage. So I suppose one thing for good employers who want to be doing the right thing, who are doing the right thing, to have a think about is, how can we demonstrate this? It's not necessarily enough just to say, we do not discriminate. We will take everything into consideration. How, from this very, very early stage, are you demonstrating that that is the culture within your organisation? Because it should be. And ultimately, if that's what we're aiming for, and we're aiming for getting the right person through the door, don't forget recruitment is that two-way street. So it's not just us as an employer looking for the correct person, but it's also making sure that the correct person wants to come and work for us. Now, there's no kind of one answer to that question. I can't sit here and say to you, if you all do tick this box, and this box, it will work. But just have a little think about it. Have a little bit think about, how are you selling your organisation from the very beginning, in addition to how are we making sure that we get the best person for us. Right. Just a little brief reminder there for you about the Equality Act, and then just moving on, reminding us of the different types of discrimination. Again, I do not intend to go through every single one of these individually. I think that most people will be familiar enough with these, but I do think that the one that I will just pick out on this particular slide is indirect discrimination. It's much rarer in recruitment to come across direct discrimination. For example, there's not many, I'm not going to put my neck on the line and say nobody, but there's not many organisations who would put a job advert out there to say, I want to only employ a man, for example. That's clearly direct discrimination unless we can justify it. Indirect discrimination, we do come across much more frequently. And ultimately, I believe the reasoning behind that is because it's rarely intentional with indirect discrimination. It's often something like a poorly worded job advert. So, again, just as a refresher for us, indirect discrimination is where we've got this rule that applies to everybody, but it puts a certain group of people at a disadvantage. So, if I was, as an employer, to say, I am only going to employ people who are 6 foot or over, that applies to everybody who walks through that door, everybody who comes for an interview. Okay. But it has that indirect knock-on effect. It's indirectly sex discrimination because women are less likely to be 6 foot or over. I'm not saying they're not, I'm not saying all men are, but it's a proportion thing. It's potentially indirect disability discrimination. People with certain health conditions may be less likely to reach that height. And indirect race discrimination as well. People of certain ethnic backgrounds may be less likely to reach that height. So it's one of those things where I might put it in. I mean, God knows why I would, and I'm just using height as an example there. But I might put it in thinking, well, height isn't a protected characteristic. Well, no, on its own it isn't. But the knock-on effect is potentially huge. And I mean, if I share with you some genuine examples, that was just a hypothetical one that I've just made up, but some genuine recruitment examples where people have been caught out by the type of language that they use. One of them was a tribunal case from, I think it was probably about 2 or 3 years ago. and it was a hairdresser, and she was looking to employ a stylist. And she'd had quite bad experience with her previous two stylists that she'd had, who hadn't lasted very long and hadn't been very popular with their customers. So when she was putting a job advert out, she thought, well, I want somebody here who can make conversation, who can have a chat, who can put the face of the salon on the map, and people want to come in here, and it's a friendly place to be. So she advertised for somebody happy to come and join the team, which was just a poor choice of word because somebody successfully sued that person for indirect disability discrimination. And I felt quite sad reading that judgment because I could see where this person was wanting to go, the reasoning behind it, but they just messed up with the way that they'd worded the job advert. Okay. There was another one, and this never made it to tribunal because it was taken down fairly quickly. Um, and some of you might have come across this, but it was one of the football clubs in the Northwest. It was AFC Filed, and they had put something out, I think it was on Twitter, to say, looking for somebody to go into such a position at Filed. But if you need to leave early to pick the kids up from school, don't bother because we're quite hardworking here. I'm paraphrasing, but it was something like that, which was clearly indirectly discriminatory on the basis of sex. So really, really careful when we're looking at recruitment that we're making sure that we are being inclusive. We're not making any decisions based on discriminatory reasons, and a clear recognition that that is a two-way benefit. It's a benefit for the person that we are interviewing, the person that we're recruiting, but it's a benefit for us as an organisation because it demonstrates to that person the way that we are. It's their first impression of us, basically. Just another little few points on recruitment. I have just spent so long talking to you about the fact that we shouldn't be making decisions based on the protected characteristics, and this slide is now going to flip that on its head and say, actually, sometimes we can. Okay. Um, two different circumstances that we're talking about here. One of them is positive action. Now, positive action is something that you will have come across before, whether it's through taking positive action yourself or whether it's through hearing people talk about positive action and not quite understanding it. The latter is where I often come across positive action. Um, Positive action, when we're describing it, is basically where an organisation has recognised they are underrepresented by a certain group of people, and they can take action to address that. And that action can include where they recruit from, where they advertise their jobs. But it can also include actually making a final decision based on a protected characteristic. But I'm emphasizing that word final because that's where most people misunderstand positive action. People will sometimes see an organisation taking positive action and say, well, they can't do that, can they? That's discrimination. And it depends on how they're applying it. If an organisation is going out to say, okay, we don't have many women working here, we're only going to employ women, that is discrimination. That's discrimination against men. Okay. But if they were saying, okay, well, we want to take some positive action, so we're going to recruit as normal, but if we get to the very end of our recruitment process and we've got two people who've scored the same, one's a woman, one's a man, then we will take the woman. But that's only once they've done their full recruitment process. Anything early in that is potentially discriminatory. Okay. And the other side of this slide, talking about objectively justifying, that is where some roles do require people of a certain protected characteristic. Personal care is probably one of the most common ones that we give as an example there. Okay. Final few bits on recruitment before we start moving on to look at onboarding and probation. We do just have a few slides included in here, which I don't want to dwell on too much, but it's about the use of AI during recruitment. And funnily enough, just before we opened the webinar this morning, Alexia and I were just having a bit of a chat about AI in employment and the fact that it's a massive topic at the moment. And many, many employers and employees are still finding their feet with it in different areas of employment. I think from a recruitment perspective, it isn't uncommon or unheard of, I should say, for employers to be using different types of AI for various reasons. But what we do really need to be cautious of is the fact that any AI system is basically only as good as the information that's been put into it. And there have been a few occasions with different organizations where they've looked at using AI during recruitment. And what they have done is they've got rid of the human bias, but all they've done is transferred that into an algorithm bias. And I can't remember which organization it was. I think it was Amazon. Started using AI during recruitment, and they found very, very quickly that it had a massive bias in favor of men. And that was because they'd used data from the past 10 years from their recruitment processes and who'd been successful, but that had been skewed towards men because over the last 10 years they'd had more men apply. So the way that AI was interpreting that was being a man must be better to work here. So, I mean, it was caught and it was rectified, but it's just a brief reminder that there's nothing to say people shouldn't use AI, that it can be a very, very good time-saving tool, but a reminder that there still needs to be some sort of human input at some point to make sure that decisions that are being made by AI are fair, reasonable, not against the Equality Act. I mean, there's other examples of different AI tools that people can use during recruitment um, regarding online interviews, for example. And the risks with those is that it can, and I don't know much about the systems themselves, but the risks with those in relation to the Equality Act is it reads faces, facial expressions, and that again can be very, very different when it comes to people who are neurodivergent. It can be different for people who maybe come from different cultural backgrounds as to what is expected or what is the norm. So I'm not saying don't use it. I would never say that. But just being aware, and we've got a couple of examples on the following slides, of the benefits and risks. Okay. And I don't know if anybody saw, I think it was back end of last week, Prime Minister was talking about the risks of AI and remote interviews. So that's something else that I'm going to be having a look into, but it's something that is clearly, because it's something being spoken about in Parliament, going to be a hot topic over the next 12 months or so, I would say. Right. Okay, final slide just to back up a little bit of that there. Talks about if we are going to use AI during recruitment, how we should, where the guidance is. That link on the slide there takes you to the Gov website, Gov guidance, and how we should actually use AI to make sure that we are keeping things fair. Okay. Okay, so moving on, just having a bit of a chat now about probation periods and onboarding. Okay. Now, I just want to revisit something that I mentioned earlier on. The answer to this question, what is a probation period, has not changed. There is no difference whatsoever to what is a probation period. If you ask me this now, if you asked me this 12 months ago, if you asked me this 18 years ago when I first started working for Acas, the reason there is now more of a focus on these things is because of the upcoming change. And I know I mentioned it earlier, but just to be really clear, the upcoming change that I'm referencing is that on the 1st of January 2027, the right to make an unfair dismissal claim, the qualifying service to make an unfair dismissal claim, is going from the current 2 years to 6 months. And it will be applied retrospectively, which means that people who are currently employed, if they've been employed from the 1st of July this year, they will reach that 6 month qualifying period on the 1st of January next year. And because of that, organisations have sat up and they've thought, well, what do we actually need to do here? Let's blow the dust off this probationary period policy we've got and see what it is that it says. Are we following it? What are our managers doing with it? Because managers are a huge part of all of this. And do we want to look at the length of it? Now, it is not for us at Acas to say to anybody, this is how long your probationary period should be. We shouldn't do that. And it's not even for us to say it should be shorter than 6 months, because, like I said earlier, our job is not to say to employers, this is how you get out of having unfair dismissal claims made against you. We're impartial. So that's not our job. Our job is to make sure that both employers and employees are acting fairly, reasonably in accordance with the law. Okay. So it may be that people still have a 6-month probationary period with regular checkups all the way through. Okay. It might be that organisations have decided to shorten those probationary periods. But what I would say for any employer who is determining the length of their probationary period or whether they want to change the length of the probationary period is just remember this, okay? What is it actually for? So I just want to focus on the right-hand side of this slide first, because this is just backing up something I've just mentioned. The probationary period is not just oh, well, we can just get rid of somebody within this period of time and it doesn't matter, okay? Because forget the unfair dismissal changes, forget the 6 months or the 2 years. I've just spent 20 minutes talking to you about the Equality Act, which applies from way before day one anyway. Probationary period doesn't make a difference to that. So if somebody was dismissed after, let's just say 2 months, and well, we're inside the 6 months, we're inside the 2 years, it doesn't matter. Well, it does, because what's to stop me if I'm that person turning around and going, well, that's because I'm a woman. You've dismissed me based on a decision to do, and you can't deny that. You can't defend that because there's no kind of process has been followed. And again, I'm not suggesting anybody on this call would do this, but it's just a way of recognising that actually it's not all about these unfair dismissal qualifying periods, this. It's about, well, what are we aiming to do during the probationary period? And that brings me to the left-hand side of the slide. So it's a defined time. You define it. It's up to you how long it is. But during that time, it's to assess suitability. And you can look at this again. We've spoken about recruitment being a two-way thing. Probation is a two-way thing. Yes, it is absolutely to have a think about how suitable the individual is for the job, but it's equally for the individual to assess how suitable the organisation is for them. And this is why, like we said earlier, it's so important that your recruitment process is spot on, because I've worked with so many organisations who have, let's say, oversold a job. They've made it the most attractive thing in the whole wide world during recruitment. And then somebody's got there and been, it's not quite what I was promised this. And they've not stayed because they're testing the employer out as much as the employer is testing them out. And that just puts that employer right back at stage one, right back at the beginning where they're having to recruit again. So really important to remember this whole thing two-way. Okay. But some of the stuff that I'd be recommending organisations consider when they're having a look at probationary periods. Okay. Firstly, how long is it? Can we justify the length of it? It wouldn't make sense, for example, off the back of this upcoming Employment Rights Act change, for all organisations to go, all right, well, we'll just make our probationary period 2 years now then, and that'll fix it. Because there is no way that would swing with a judge. Absolutely not, because it doesn't fit this thing about it being a learning period and a time to assess. Okay. But even doing that, a reminder that probationary periods do not change the fact that after 6 months, somebody can make an unfair dismissal claim. You can have a 12-month probationary period, but once somebody's 6 months into that, if they are dismissed, they can make an unfair dismissal claim. Not to say they'd be successful or not, it would be completely dependent on the circumstances, but just putting the title of probationary period on something doesn't or won't take away that right. So that 6 months stays as 6 months, regardless of the length of our probationary period. Okay. But other things just to have a think about, and again, stuff that you may well have already looked at, stuff that you might be in the process of looking at. What happens during the probation period? What's it actually for? I've described it as a time where people can assess the organisation can assess them. But we also need to have a think about expectations, don't we? So what am I expecting to see from this employee and at what point? And that might sound quite obvious to people, but just have a think about how things actually work in your organisation. And this might differ from role to role within the same organisation. If I use myself as an example, so as I mentioned earlier, I'm a senior advisor for Acas, and every time you go into a new position within Acas, you go into a probationary period. It's It's common across all organisations. So our probationary period is 6 months, but it's a fairly commonly spoken about, almost unwritten rule that you're not actually fully up and running in this sort of role until you've been doing it a couple of years, because that's how long it takes to get all of that experience of all the different parts of the role. So the reason I'm using that as an example is because we would say that after 6 months, you need to be demonstrating X with a view to becoming fully operational. You do not have to be fully operational after 6 months because that would be unrealistic. So just keeping in mind, what is the probationary period actually for? How much are we expecting from an individual at each stage? And that brings me on to another part there, the at each stage bit. Because as we all know, it's all well and good having a set length probationary period, but what are we doing during it? There's got to be an expectation, and not only at the very beginning are we setting out after, I don't know, 1 month we want to see this, after 3 months we want to see this, after 5 months we want to see this, but who's actually doing that? And this is where the line managers come in. Most of the time, these sorts of conversations will be being had with the line manager. And what we would expect to see in a clearly understandable probation period would be clear, set out review points. This is when you will be meeting with your manager, and this is what it's for. I can't emphasize enough the difference it can make in a team with the way things are spoken about. So probation periods shouldn't be spoken about within the general culture of our organisation as a, well, you better get that right because you're still on probation. That's almost like a threatening thing to say. They should be spoken right in the positive thing that they are. So during probation, this is your opportunity to learn things, to get things right, to change things. Okay. So just remembering that it's really important as to how line managers approach this, because you can have the best policy in the world, but if managers aren't doing what they're asked to be doing, which is regular check-ins, documented regular check-ins, I should say, if they're not doing what they're asked to be doing, you might as well not have the policy. Working within a company up in Lancaster a few weeks ago, and I had somebody there who was really frustrated actually, which it was quite sad because they had a situation where a lady had started working with them about 6 months ago and had just been kind of thrown in at the deep end, sink or swim, basically. So the other two people in the team that she was working with had tried their best to kind of try and train her, but that was alongside their existing jobs as well. And it just so happened in this particular team there was no manager either. They're recruiting for a manager as well. So this lady had just been kind of left to do whatever for 6 months. And she is this close to leaving, apparently, which is not great for her, clearly, but it's not great for the organisation either, because they're right back at stage one again with no clear view as to how they're gonna, if they do have to replace this person because she sadly has to leave, how are they going to make sure it doesn't happen again? And the person I was speaking to was kind of removed from the situation and was talking to me about how she can get direct to buy-in to do all of this stuff so that it doesn't happen again. But it does demonstrate how important it is, because let's not forget, it's all well and good having a policy, it's all well and good having these conversations, but we're dealing with people at the end of the day. And it can't be nice for anybody to be kind of going into work each day unsure of what's expected of them, not clear about how are they doing, not clear about if there's anything they need to do to improve in order to pass the probation. So line managers play a pivotal part in that. Yes, the rest of the team will as well, if indeed we include the rest of the team for things like training or maybe having a bit of a buddy system or a mentor system. But if we do that, and if we are putting those additional expectations on the team, that should be structured for them as well, not just piled on with no clear direction about what that looks like. Okay. Some other stuff we want to have a think about when we're thinking about probation. So it's not just a case of we've got to have these regular documented check-ins, but in between, anything goes. We can still have those more frequent conversations as line managers, because there is a general expectation, full stop, that managers do this. And this is nothing to do with probation. This is performance management, standard performance management stuff. So completely reasonable to expect managers to be doing this with all of their staff. But I'm not going to say particularly with those on probation, but I will say using these as guidelines as to how they have conversations with people on probation, particularly that bottom one. If there is something that isn't happening that would be expected, what support can we put in place? How can it be improved? When would we want to see an improvement by? And what does that improvement look like? So important. All about clarity for people so that they know what to expect. Just another couple of points, just while I'm talking about the sorts of things that you may well have in your probation period or should have in your probation period. We've spoken about these milestones, we've spoken about regular meetings and so on, but a couple of other things to think about. Extension. Do you have the right to extend? In what circumstances might you extend? Okay. Really keep an eye on that and make sure that if you are considering extensions, that is something that you have the right to do. And contingencies. What happens if somebody goes off sick? Is that an automatic extension? For me, it will be dependent on the type of sickness. If you've got a 5-month probation period and somebody takes 2 singular days off here and there, I don't think that warrants an automatic extension because you've still got the time to do what the probation period is there for, which is to assess suitability. Okay. But if somebody goes off for 3 months of those 5 months, it may well be that you say, actually, we've not seen enough here. We're going to have to extend this when this person returns for that period of 3 months that they've been off in order to ascertain their suitability. Don't forget that wouldn't extend the 6-month right for the unfair dismissal claim. They'd still have been employed longer than 6 months by that point. But also don't forget that they would still be subject to your usual attendance management policy. So you would still be applying that in the same or a similar way during probation. Okay. So just a couple of other things to think about. One other contingency that I would encourage people to have a think about while there is this focus on probation periods is around what if the manager goes off? Because it can be quite disruptive. Got a manager of a certain team who needs to take some time away from work for whatever reason. But if you've got somebody on probation, don't let them slip through the cracks. Make sure that somebody else is picking up those conversations that should be being had with them to provide the support, to listen to any concerns, and to talk about any improvements that may or may not be needed. Okay. Okay. Couple more slides, but I think these are probably background slides to cover some of the stuff that I've already spoken about. So we've got this upcoming change from January 2027, which I've mentioned a couple of times and which I am sure that we're all aware of. Some practical steps, but again, stuff that I've already spoken about there. I can't emphasize enough the importance of the role of the line manager in this. Making the most, okay? So again, clear guidance. I think there's pretty much everything on here, stuff that I've already spoken about. So what's expected? When putting probation periods in place, ask for feedback. I think that the people who are best at giving feedback on probation periods and inductions are the people who've just been through them. So particularly inductions, we've all worked, or maybe we all still work in places where there's certain lingo that is used that would make no sense at all to anybody outside of that organisation. I know I do. If, for example, in fact, something that somebody said to me on my very, very first day at Acas, something like, use Paradox to sort out all that tracing and then send it off to the conciliators. No idea what that meant. Paradox was a system that we used. Tracing was making sure that the right piece of paper got to the right person. But it was my first job straight out of university. I had no clue what they were talking about. But it's just language that creeps in day to day. So the reason I'm sharing that example with you is because with the best will in the world, people who've been with an organisation for quite a long time will miss stuff because it is just second nature to them. So when somebody has been through an induction, we can get really, really valuable feedback from them about, well, actually, I wasn't sure about X, Y, and Z on my second or third day because that wasn't shared with me. Oh, well, we can fix that for the next person. So getting that feedback from them not only makes them feel valued, which they are, but it can also help build engagement with them, build a better relationship, but also improve things for future people coming into the business. Okay. Okay. And then we've just included a few slides in here about actually having these conversations. And I think that ultimately, again, most of the stuff on here, and this is aimed at line managers in having these catch-ups, we have picked up on, but just some other stuff to highlight, making sure it's private. And I know we on the call would all do that. But again, I'm sure we've all come across managers in the past who have just caught up with somebody in the canteen or just crossed them in the corridor and said, "Oh, how are we getting on? Is everything all right?" And included that as a catch-up. That's not a catch-up. Okay, so just making sure managers are doing what we're asking them to do. And this bit about saving things in a central place, that's your contingency. In case your manager goes off sick, in case your manager wins the lottery and disappears and doesn't come back to work, we can pick up where that manager has left off. Okay. Couple of other pointers for these conversations. Again, stuff that we've spoken about, really, really clear about what we are there to have these conversations about. And some conversational aids, which you might have come across before, but which we do find useful just for highlighting the importance of regular feedback. And when we're talking about regular feedback, by the way, we're talking about both developmental and positive. Um, Positive feedback is probably, I think, the quickest and cheapest motivator in most workplaces. It doesn't cost anything, but as long as it's genuine, it's long lasting for people. Oh, they've noticed what I'm doing here. Okay. So the acronym on the left, this is what we talk about when we talk about feedback. You've probably come across that before, just making sure that it is given. The specific and the timely bits are really important. It's not enough for a manager just to say, good job, good job, good job to everybody as they leave in the office or they leave in the workplace of an evening. But thanks for doing this today to a specific person is very, very different. And the timely bit clearly works both ways. We've spoken there during probation about these regular reviews at, for example, 1, 3, and 5 months. But if a manager's seeing something that is absolutely fantastic, or indeed the opposite, in between those meetings, we're not going to wait for the meeting to have the conversation about it. It needs to be done in a timely manner. Okay. The stuff on the right, other ways that we can encourage managers to have a think about how they give feedback. The praise sandwich one needs to be used correctly if it's going to be being used. And what I mean by that is people sometimes use this as a way of avoiding a difficult conversation. So I'm sure you're all aware of what I'm talking about here, but it's the one where we give a bit of positive, then a bit of constructive, then a bit of positive feedback. I'm not a huge fan of it because I think too many people know about it. So people are often sat waiting for that middle bit. But the flip side of that is sometimes managers will use this and almost make up those two outside bits. So there aren't any really genuinely positive things to say, but they make them up to avoid the difficult conversation about the middle bit. So, Helen, you came to work on time today. Well done for that. You slept at your desk all day though, so that's not great. But you woke up and went home on time, so well done. No, that's not genuine feedback. That middle bit, the sleeping at my desk, is the stuff that my manager needs to be talking to me about. And in which case, they should really probably be using one of these other conversational structures. So the AID, the AID one, is action, impact, desired outcome. So I've seen you've been asleep at your desk all day. The impact has been this. What I want you to do is that. And the SPIBI, SBIBI one, is very, very similar. This is the situation, this is the behaviour I'm seeing and the impact it's having. So this is the behaviour I want to see and the impact that will have. And that can be used in both positive and constructive ways. So in a probation meeting, situation is right, well, we're having this meeting because it's 3 months, so it's our regular catch up, it's expected, blah, blah, blah. The behaviours I'm seeing from you are good, 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 good. And the impact that is having is you're well on your way to passing this probation. The behaviours I want to see from you is a little bit more of that, some more of that. And what that will mean is you will be at this standard by this time. Okay. So just some useful things maybe to share with managers who are responsible for having these conversations. Okay. And my very final slide is just a reminder of some of our other services there. So any of the stuff up there that might be useful to you, most of it is available on the Acas website. And that's me. Thank you very much. Checking, do we have any questions that have come in? Oh, so we've got a comment there, yeah. Yeah, so that's just a comment about somebody who's on my page with the praise sandwich who also doesn't agree that it works. Absolutely right. I think that the people focus on the positive things and leave the area for development, and will leave that sort of conversation going, I'm great, I'm spot on, nothing needs to change. So I agree with that. I think that it can be overused, it can be misused, and it doesn't always have the desired effect.
Helen, I've got a question which I think will probably come up in conversations. If an employer gets to the end of employee gets to the end of that 6-month probationary period, and the employer is thinking it's not quite worked out, but then the employee says, well, actually, I'm neurodiverse, you didn't put the adjustments in place, and that's why I wasn't able to succeed in the role. What's kind of that position there?
Yeah, and I mean, it's similar to what the position would be anyway at this time. What we would always say is that an employer can only act on the information that they've got. So hopefully during the probation period, the manager has given opportunity for people to share the fact that they're neurodivergent. Now, just giving opportunity to share that doesn't mean that people will necessarily share that. Might not feel comfortable for a whole host of reasons. But if the condition, whatever that condition may be, has been impacting on their performance, then the performance management conversations would still be being had at a regular interval throughout probation. So there's further opportunity for an individual to disclose. And hopefully, again, they would at that early stage, so the reasonable adjustments can be put in place. Now, if we got right to the end of a probation period and somebody is actually not past it because of their performance, and they are being invited to a dismissal meeting, and in the dismissal meeting, they say, well, actually, it's because of this. There have been several tribunal cases that state that employers can only know what they know, but once they know it, they have to act on it. So one particular case I'm thinking of is very, very similar to that scenario, was where somebody had been actually dismissed for capability, had not disclosed the condition the whole way through. The employer had followed a really, really structured, fair process to get to where they got to. The employee appealed, and it was at the appeal stage they shared their health condition. And the appeal officer said, nope, too late. The dismissal at the time was fair and therefore it stands. That person went to an employment tribunal and they won their claim, because what the judge said was that once the appeal officer was made aware, that should have had a bearing on the appeal. So it would have been fair for the appeal to be upheld. That doesn't take away the fact that at the point of dismissal, the dismissal would have been fair based on the information available to the dismissing officer, but the appeal officer had more information. So following that logic, if it is disclosed at some point, the employer needs to take that into consideration. And a reasonable adjustment at that point may well be, okay, well, we've got this information now. We will put in steps over the next couple of months to see if there's any improvement there, and then we'll revisit.
Perfect, thank you. Does anyone have any more questions at all for Helen? A minute or two. Okay, well, in that case, thank you so much, Helen, for a fantastic webinar, really insightful, some excellent knowledge shared there. As I said, I will share the slides afterwards. Helen, are we okay to share your email address if people have got questions?
Absolutely.
Perfect. And as I said, if you do have any questions, please do contact Helen or myself and Charter team. But thank you again for attending. Thank you, Helen, for facilitating, Inez, my colleague, for looking after all the technical side of Zoom. we hope you enjoyed it, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next session. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.